From clean combos to insane sustain. This build is amazing for both ganks and 1v1s. Honestly, it's truly something. Combining the ice achievement with jetstriker, this build is extremely tanky while still being hella fast. And just like always, this build has an insane list of techs that push this build to a whole nother level. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into the build. Not so hot take, but the alloyed katana is the cleanest weapon to combo with. There's just something about landing that crit that just Honestly, it's one of the best medium weapons out there, and not to mention that you get a free 5% damage multiplier when you use it with the Royal Etrian Guard. Back to the crit, it does pretty good posture damage, especially when you stack it with stone. The pressure is super good. However, if you're not a fan of stone, there's plenty of other good options when it comes to your enchant. You can use Optification for the speed boost and better movement in your fights, or Prof Thorns, which actually recently got buffed. You can also pick up Nemesis, which is a really good enchant in ganks and really fun to play, but I'd say put that on a Crisp Blade because the Crisp Blade stats are really good while having a bad crit, so it just synergizes really well. Going into the mantras on this build, the loadout I'm running on this build is really nice. Honestly, the mantras are quite perfect. Starting off with Ice Smash, in my opinion, the best guard break in Deepwoken thanks to the talent Fragile Freeze. The time you have to punish block breaks is significantly longer, letting you push out more DPS out of that guard break. Next up is Frozen Servants, a mantra that's mostly slept on by the larger community. It's really useful to kill pressure while your opponent's on the offensive, and it's really nice to roll cast with, catching people off guard. Moving on, I use Prominent Straw, a very strong gap closer that also catches people off guard. It's very useful to chase with in ganks, and it does decent damage as we get it to level 5. Next up is Master's Flourish, and at this point is honestly my favorite mantra. It's basically a must-have on almost all medium builds. Like always, works amazingly with roll casting. Next up is Ice Daggers, a staple of the Frost Attunement. An amazing mantra that's super rewarding, and slide casting it after a parry trade can let you get behind someone's block and bypass, giving you a very free punish. For my mobility, I'm using Dash because the Frostdraw mobilities are kinda mid in my opinion. It's just super consistent, but you can pick up the other mobilities if you prefer that. For my support, I'm using Reinforce, which you might be thinking, is Reinforce really that good? And yes, it's super OP, and I'll get into why later on in the video. Next up is Ice Lance, a super good mantra that lands pretty often. It's a good gap closer, and it's really good for pressure because when you land it, that second hit is always there. And finally, we have Jet Kick. This mantra is really dumb for so many reasons. It's our third gap closer on this build, and it does a lot of damage. It's hard to react to due to the mantra just being weirdly buggy sometimes, and it's a really good roll catcher. Honestly, just an S tier mantra. Anyways, that's about it for the full mantra loadout. Like I said before, the mantra loadout is pretty much perfect, so I don't see much room to change it there, but as always, completely preference, so it's up to you what you want to do. Moving on to the talents, as per usual, I'm running ever-changing Aegis for the tankiness and Perfect Flash for the damage. In fact, on this build specifically, I can utilize Perfect Flash even more than usual, and that's thanks to Reinforce. If I drop to anything above 91%, I can use Reinforce to heal back up to 95% and have my Perfect Flash be active. I also pick up Overflowing Dam for a 15% damage boost on our M1s, and Tough Love for another 10%, and with 80 medium, our M1s do a good bit of damage. I also pick up high agility cards like Cheap Shot to get close to pen cap, and Down Comes the Claw, a relatively newer card where if you land your crit, your opponent can't dodge twice in a row. That's about it for the talents. Now let's move on to the exciting part, which is the techs and synergies. First up is a synergy that makes our M1s hurt just a bit more, and that's by using Nullifying Clarity. This talent gives us a 10% damage boost upon landing an M1 on someone who has an elemental status effect on them. It removes the effect, but this synergizes extremely well, as the Frost Slowness effect is kinda useless on its own anyways. To further increase our damage, we can combine our 6% damage katana with the Royal Etrian Guard, which gives katanas an extra 5% damage boost, making our katana just always on base to have an 11% damage multiplier. Now our damage is good and all, but what about our tankiness? With 25 Fortitude after Shrine, you would imagine the tankiness on this build isn't the greatest, but this build is actually hella tanky, and that's because of two abilities: Orbital Ice giving you a 15% damage reduction and Reinforce giving you a 10% one. When stacking the two, you get a 25% damage reduction, and in a normal fight you would almost always have at least one of them active, or at least two of them active at the same time. Okay, so now you know this build is both tanky and has good DPS, so now you might be wondering about the mobility. Now I know this build might look like a normal PvP build, but it actually also doubles as a crazy track star. I can scale some crazy walls with this build. Stacking the Fedonor passive, which gives us a 25% multiplier multiplier on our agility when we're climbing. With kickoff and strato steps from jetstriker, you can escape from almost any fight. Now here are the final stats of the build. Now this build is pretty well rounded, as all the cards I love to use in game. The full builder link with the stat order in the summary section is in the description below. While you're down there, you might as well subscribe and check out some of the other links. I love you guys as always, and with that said, Kaido out!